Hello and welcome to Staying Ahead of the Curve. I'm Jeff Snyder, Vice President, Senior Consultant with Camac Retirement Group. We're coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland at the National Association of State Retirement Administrators Conference. And she's back. We've brought back Beth Bell. She's tax counsel for Senator Ben Cardin. Beth, thanks for joining us back on the show.
Well, thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
So we're in August. It's the August recess, and we last spoke in June at the Spark Conference, and we talked about tax reform, healthcare reform. Wanted to catch up with you on what's going on from the legislative side of the not the House but the Senate.
Right, sure thing. I'm happy to chat. Before I do, you don't have to give our traditional disclaimer that anything I say here is on behalf of myself and not my office. But I will say that NASRA was actually formed in Baltimore in 1955, believe it or not. So I couldn't be more pleased to join you here.
Well, thank you.
Of course. In terms of the legislative agenda going forward, I think now we are hearing more and more about a pivot to tax reform. I know your viewers probably followed this. We had a big healthcare vote at the end of July, early August, and that was really a big procedural threshold issue to get through before we could head towards the next big piece of the legislative agenda. That's not to say that healthcare isn't still on the table. I think you'll still see some bipartisan work on that. But overall, I think most people's attention in the Senate and the House too, and dare I say the administration, is turning towards tax reform.
So there's pivoting going, and as a person who is focused on healthcare and brought into healthcare, and also how do you pivot your line of thinking? I mean, as a person working with Senator Cardin, you've got to, you're juggling many issues. So how do you pivot that in your mindset and how you're approaching your job?
So I think those things, the healthcare and the tax reform, they were, even though tax reform wasn't as visible, always running on two simultaneous tracks. Mm-hmm. The healthcare bill did contain a big tax component. But at the same time, the Senate Finance Committee and the Democratic offices and Republican offices, both sides were also focused on what their principles were for tax reform, what their ultimate goals would be, and how to engage with each other. So it, even though it's a pivot in terms of what you see on the Senate floor and what folks are talking about, there was work behind the scenes going on with tax.
So one of the things that has been talked about, we talked about this back in June, is, I don't know what we want to call it, but like the Ratification of a portion. And you and I have chatted before about scoring the bills and making sure that the bills are revenue neutral. We don't want to add more debt. We want to make sure that when we're doing tax reform that it benefits everyone and also future generations. I think there's that balancing act there. But can you comment a little bit about the concept of Rothifying a portion or making a portion of the deferral after tax?
Yes, so I didn't think there'd be anything new under the sun in terms of tax reform. Ratification is at least a new term. Yeah. It was a concept that was included in Chairman Camp's draft that was released back in 2014, and we've just coined new shorthand for it. So what you have in terms of the spectrum of what people are looking at in Rothifying, if you will, are a couple things. One, you have full Rothification, so moving everything to a Roth model. Then you have what Chairman Camp did in his draft, which was about kind of a 50-50 allocation up to a certain limit. And then you have also the idea of only Rothifying or partially Rothifying certain accounts. So 401ks versus IRAs is another split that's being looked at. And I think that members come at this from a lot of different perspectives. Some things that they like to think about are, some members like to take a first do no harm approach. That's been the approach of our office so far in terms of changing retirement incentives. A lot of members who are taking a serious look at this want to wait to see what kind of empirical evidence comes out in terms of how moving to a Roth model for some accounts or partially or completely will affect the amount of savings accumulation. And then there is also the revenue component, like you mentioned, for sure. Depending on how you move to Roth, there will, and depending on the scoring procedures that are eventually used for tax reform, you may move some money into what we call the budget window. And as you know from your experience with Congress, That means that usually when we're scoring or when we're coming up with revenue numbers for a bill, what the Joint Committee on Taxation, our official scorekeepers, look at is a 10-year window that's also used for our budget purposes. And so if you take away tax deferral as an incentive and keep the incentive in the out years past that 10-year window, you can question whether this is a good way to do it, but you will actually raise money within the 10-year window we use to score tax reform, but you won't see the revenue losses outside of that window.
And this is something I know, having followed Senator Cardin when he was a congressperson many years ago. Retirements are obviously a very important issue to him. It's also a very important issue to Senator Portman, formerly a congressman from Ohio.
For sure.
And he's taken the lead, Senator Cardin's taken the lead on all of these major issues.
Yes, so he's going to be paying a lot of attention to what happens in the retirement sphere, and also remember that we're looking at the way we do tax reform procedurally is we're looking at a reconciliation bill, which brings up fond memories for Senator Cardin Portman, because that was the same type of vehicle that they were able to put their retirement improvements on back in 2001. Extra, yep. So we're looking forward to engaging in this. So far, we're at the very beginning stages. Hope there will be bipartisan outreach, and that the reconciliation procedure, if it's used, will make room for retirement reforms.
And when we talked in September, I think one of the things that I and the audience find interesting is, how the staffs work together, whether it's for one party or the other, and then how you kind of cross the line around the House of Representatives. I mean, people are talking to one another behind the scenes. Not only do the congressmen and the senators talk to one another, but the staffs interact, and that helps kind of cushion and move things along. And they may not always be something that the audience is aware of.
Right, and we do coordinate with each other quite a bit, even though it's kind of invisible. It looks behind the scenes, and sometimes, frankly, you don't see it in the results. We might end up with a partisan package. I think that's more likely if we use reconciliation, but at the same time, the members and the staffs do coordinate quite a bit and try to find common ground where we can find it. The politics of the situation may or may not allow it this time around, but we do talk to each other quite a bit.
And also, you're meeting with thought leaders inside and outside the industry. There are associations, I would imagine, like whether it's NASRA, NAGD, or Spark, but also people who help to inform or educate about a particular topic, maybe from their point of view, but at least, I mean, it must be challenging to have many varied opinions and to reconcile them all. I can only imagine being in your shoes.
Yes, it is not. So right now, I do not envy my Republican colleagues because I think they're just starting this process. But at the same time, I think that stakeholder feedback is absolutely necessary. We have good staff up on the Hill, on the Finance Committee, a lot of people with various amounts of expertise, but really getting people to come in. I would encourage all of your viewers, if they have an opinion, to write in or talk to their associations and get their voices heard on this, just because it's really important to know all the players.
And I know as a consultant or advisor in the space, we hear from vendors and people all the time about what their points of view are in terms of their services. It's what you're talking about is really what I do on steroids, because you are hearing a multitude of things, and then to reconcile that, and then to distill it down into something that's meaningful for a senator, because a senator or a congressman has many issues that he or she is working on. They're not just working on one. Presumably, even though they're part of the Finance Committee, they may be voting or thinking about many issues, whether it's foreign policy or some other domestic issue.
Yes, they have a lot on their plates. They have their favorite issues, but they have to be able to vote knowledgeably on anything that comes across the Senate floor. They're on all different committees. So coming in with a clear message and knowing the trade-offs and knowing the pressures on the Hill too, I think is a very, very valuable thing that you can come to our office with. Knowing exactly what you'd like to say to our office and what you'd like to see out of the tax reform process, it's really a good give and take that we can take a lot away from, and as we move forward with policy changes that we're looking at.
And lastly, then coordinating with the executive branch, because you've got the folks at the White House, but then you have Treasury and Internal Revenue Service. I mean, it's a confluence of folks that have to come together to be informed and educated and to come up with an opinion.
Yes, and I know that sometimes it seems like we're not doing anything, or maybe it just seems like we're treading water sometimes. But it's a decentralized process for a reason.
Yep.
It's so that everyone can have their input, and so that things move slowly enough that, or deliberatively enough, I guess is a better way to put it, so that everyone can be heard and everyone can represent their constituencies.
Well put. So Beth, enjoy the August recess. I know maybe it's
so
not
much.
necessarily, you're going to be doing some work and whatnot, but we appreciate you coming back and giving an update to the viewers.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Thanks.